So income mapping. So I want to talk about this on a lot of fronts. So we're gonna dive in. But the first thing I want to talk about is, oh, unless it's on the picture frame. Is it on the picture frame? Oh, this little guy isn't, so I could move him for sure. Yeah. And then like slide the picture over tree here. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, so the first thing I really want to talk about is knowing your business model. I think that what happens in the online space sometimes is that we hear someone else talking about, what it looks like to plan out their income or what they're doing for it. And we completely lose context of what our business model really is. And so what it might look like for us, right? So it's basically like this idea that, if your business model, let's say mine, right? If I have my business model and I'm income planning, it looks completely different than probably how any of you guys would, because I'm doing it off of base rate. I don't know my clients' revenue. I can look back at past years and take averages, but even that wouldn't be totally accurate because like obviously our clients' income has changed a lot since then. And so for me, like when I would project out income, it would never make sense, like for, let's say like for next month, for example, I think our projected income right now, i.e. in terms of like base rate payments that we know, is like $28,000 maybe, where we make up so much room, i.e. like where we make up, I don't know, like, 60 to 70 to 80K of that is with client revenue. So for me to start trying to predict that out, sometimes I just can't. And so I do most of my modeling and most of my planning off of base rate in terms of like what I'm like paying team and all of that kind of stuff. But the reason I wanted to say that is because to say like, isn't that just important to notice like how Lacey does it in a lit up life would not necessarily make sense for how you might do it in your business, because we have totally different business models. Like I don't have a launch model, I have revenue share, right? So please keep that in mind when you're getting like inundated at this time of year with like sales planning and income planning and all of this stuff, is that might not always be the best way for you to do it or the most accurate reflection of how you do it, right? Thank you, Katie. They're my tried and true press-on nails. Cannot recommend them enough. Obsessed with them. They're dashing diva. I love them. I've had them on for like a week and a half, maybe. I think I went to Disney this weekend, like wore them through everything. They're great. Michelle says, I do love that you have the base rate that you can plan around and then everything else gets to feel like a big bonus, even if it's a little unexpected. Totally. And for a lot of my clients, I have them plan like that with launches and stuff. They might have certain base things of recurring revenue, like a mastermind or one-on-one or whatever. And so we can plan with that, and then launches get to be bonus. So it looks different for everybody, right? But I think it's just good to see that. And then the same is true depending on where you're at in your business. So that's another thing I want to talk about. If you are new-ish in business and you don't have, like predictably knowing like I have these many spots and they stay full and I'm going to be able to project this out, or they don't have like, hey, I've done these 4 launches in the past. And so reliably, I know that we do about this much and we increase by about this much percentage every time. If you don't have that data, it's not bad to plan out income, but it can be very misleading, right? Because you don't have real data that's backing it up. You are just making predictions, right? Kind of like out of nowhere, and that's okay. But what can happen with those like made up projections is that they can become expectations, right? And so that's what can get really hard. Where I am a big fan of doing this is when you're trying to show yourself what's possible in your business if you're newer. So I'll have some of my clients who, we're not at a place where we can pretty reliably project income do maps of like, map me out 5 ways that your business could make whatever 300K this year, 200K, like it doesn't matter, whatever their thing is. But like what we're using it for is to show possibility and opportunity. We're not using it to go, okay, you have this one thing, and so you have to sell exactly this many spots, exactly this many of this, exactly this many of this, now go. That is the quickest way to stress yourself the fuck out in business. Okay. So why we do it is because initially, right, it feels good to be like, okay, I have this one plan. I have to sell 6 of these, 10 of these, 13 of these, whatever, go. And it can like feel like it provides some like, you know, groundedness, I guess you could say, in like a time that can feel uncertain in your business. But what I think it can really do is create a lot of expectation that puts you in a position of feeling like, if it doesn't look like this many spots, or like I've sold this many by this time, oh, I want to see what you guys are saying. I like the map me out 5 different ways you can make that. Yes, we'll talk about that more. Mandy likes that too. Hey, Mandy. Yes, I love that. We have to lower the pressure all the time. Exactly. Michelle, I think I missed a comment from you. If you can tell me what it was. And that maybe I didn't, or I think Shari commented, somebody commented that I missed. But it's so important to make sure that like you playing with opportunity and possibility does not become expectation, right? Oh, okay, good. Michelle says that's very much where I'm at, making it projected income. Totally. And it's more than okay to do that as long as there's perspective around that, right? And Jordan said, I love this idea and have been doing it. However, I'm missing the clients to fill my revenue projections. Totally. And that's where it can feel frustrating, is when we're like, I made these projections and they're not coming true. And it like can feel so tough. But if we were like, no, I just mapped out possibility and now I'm like working toward how this happens in my business, what it does is it flings a bunch of doors open for you, because it shows you there are tons of ways to make this. And then you get to pick your strategy and get committed, right? But what it should be showing you is how many ways there are to do this. When you pick one thing and you project it out and it has to look like this and whatever, again, especially when you're newer and you're not working off data, all you're doing is closing a ton of doors in your brain. You're like, well, it has to look this way, so all these other 15 ways it cannot look like that. The doors are closed, must be this, must look this way. And I just see so many people have really shitty, stressful years in business trying to follow this one plan that they kind of like arbitrarily made up, or like, you know, they did like a well-intentioned training on that, but like it wasn't the right fit or right model for them based on where they were at, right? Hey, Jess, she said, oh man, yes, I feel like numbers forecasting is sometimes false security. That's such a good way to say it, false security. It's like something I can control in the moment, but not really the long run. Exactly. Michelle says, I feel this, right? So true. This is much more expansive approach about the pressure. Exactly. And I think you're like, Jess said it perfectly. That was the word that like I couldn't pull out at the moment. Leave it to our word girl to say it so perfectly. Which is, it's a false sense of security. In that moment when you're mapping it, you're like, ah, oh, good, I know, perfect, this is it. And it gives you that like quick hit, quick fix kind of thing. But over the course of the year, it can bring up so much pressure and it can make you stop before you've even started. Like I've had clients come to me that have been like, okay, like this is my income projections for the year, but I'm already in June and I haven't hit X every month. So like, you know, forget it. And you know, we'll start working together. And I'm like, well, where did this even come from? You know, like what was this based on? So I think it's really important to say that. I think that there are many good things we can take from bigger businesses or businesses further ahead than us. But what we have to remember is they're working off of data. Like when big companies are making like projections for yearly income, nobody's sitting in a room and going, what would feel fun and expansive this year? No, they're like sitting there going like, what happened last year? What is the percentage we typically grow? All of that kind of stuff. And so I think that we have to see that those are separate things in our business. If we want to do the what would be fun and expansive thing, by all means, like could not love that more. And please be careful not to now make that a set standard for your business where you spend the rest of the year feeling frustrated or disappointed or closing off other opportunities because it's not this one thing on this one piece of paper. I will tell you the majority of my clients that have grown quickly, hit multi 6 figures, 7 figures, etc. It never looked how they thought it was going to look, right? It never panned out like exactly perfectly to plan of like, this happens, this many in this spot, this many in the. So when you do that, you're creating so much limitation for yourself. And again, usually we're learning this from people that are much further along than us. And the way they're teaching it makes a ton of sense for their business, right? So I just really want to keep coming back to that, reminding you like everything we talk about today, please filter through the lens of for your business, your business model. I have to do that all the time. The way I make money in my business is different than anyone else I know. So for me to use anyone else's like planning structure stops making sense because that is not how my business works, right? Can you share how you are planning for the next year or how you would do it with clients overall? Would be super curious of the planning process and steps. Yes, I will. You probably won't like my answer, but I totally will. Similar question to Lisa, how do you plan for the year without getting too specific or attached? So there is not like one way I help clients plan, if that makes sense. I think that it is very dependent on that client, that business model, where they're at, that kind of thing. If a client is new enough that we don't have like replicable programs that we know, like we're launching these things next year kind of thing. I was saying you won't like it, Elisa, just because like it's going to be non-specific to a certain extent, but yeah, which, of course it is. I'll come back to yours, Michelle, too. So if we don't know, like, okay, these are a suite of programs and this is what we're launching next year, I usually would never do a year plan, to be honest. I don't think that makes a lot of sense for a business that we're still very much in the build phase for. I think to make a year plan can be so ridiculous and stressful, because like, what are we're guessing that in whatever fucking September of next year that we're going to decide at that point to launch a new program about XXX kind of thing. Well, like, I don't know, you have 11 months between now and then. So for us to slot in a program, like what if you learn a ton over those 11 months, which of course you're going to, that points you in a different direction. Like sometimes that plan can become really limiting, right? So I really like to go 3 to 6 months with clients that are new, and sometimes even less, because it's like, especially let's say like you just have to fill your one-on-one or something, like that's your whole fucking plan. We might now plan out actions to do that. I love doing that. Like, cool, when are we doing different actions to do that? Like maybe this month we're focusing on like list growth with like a freebie, and this month we're focusing on doing a conversion event to bring more people in. Like we'll do that, but like the plan is do it until you fill your one-on-one, right? So, or maybe you're doing your first launch. The plan is do your first launch and then we learn from it and see what happens, just laughing out loud because I put income plan on our coaching agenda or on our coaching list for this week. Dang it. We could still talk about it, I promise. But you're getting the gist. So yeah. And listen, I think it's okay to love planning, but I think it's just where it becomes unhelpful, right? Because that's what I see with so many people. It's like we were talking about earlier, like where the income map starts to close a ton of doors, or where like you created this plan for the year and you poured so much into it, and now you almost feel like you have to follow it, as opposed to being like, wait, of course I can adapt. Like I just did my first launch. The smartest thing I can do is take the data from that, learn and adapt. So I think that we build a lot of times without thinking about like the amount of information and data we're going to get over the next 3 months, 6 months, 11 months, whatever. And if we're not factoring that in, I think we're doing ourselves such a disservice, because we're learning all this shit. And then we're like, putting it over here in favor of like following this thing we did in December when we like didn't know all that, right? Yes, exactly, Alessia. If you're just trying to fill up your one-on-one, like that is your plan. Like you can plan out the process stuff, but to like try to project like, well, I'm going to get 3 clients this month and 4 clients this month and then 6 this month, and then I'll have it really can feel so stressful. And I think what it does for a lot of people is it makes what is becoming a great business with momentum behind it feel like it's not working because you wrote down 4 for January and you didn't get 4. And so you feel like you're already behind at the beginning of the year. And that is not helpful, right? Hey, Emily, yes, being open to changing the plan. Exactly. And so then the way I would plan with a client that was much further along, if we had like a total set of programs and, an entire suite, we knew all of these same things are launching next year. Obviously that would be totally different. We would be planning out like the specifics of when is this happening? What are the conversion events with it? What are the processes that need to happen? Like we're planning, I think a good way to say it is like we're planning in a way that helps their team get on board too. So we're trying to be specific with like dates, what program, when, things like that, because we have all of those under our belts already, right? And it doesn't even mean that won't change or we won't adapt or adjust that, but having that down is really more important when you have a team and things like that, because everyone has to get on board. So then it becomes useful and helpful and really, really efficient, right? Shari says, I love this conversation. We play a lot between possibility and planning and base projections based on capacity and programs as well with clients. And I haven't heard anyone articulate it like this publicly. Why I love joining these. Awesome. Thank you, Shari. Thank you for being here. Yeah, Emily says, too true. Hey, Marie. Yes. Hey, she. Yes, with team. Exactly. So I love my clients to be able to go to their team and say, like, here's what we're working with. Or like one of my clients, a really, really key member of her team is going on maternity leave next year. So we've already started mapping out the majority of her next year with that in mind, with that, team member, that team member's time off, her maternity leave in mind, and mapping it around that. So she knows next year, like, cool, I'm doing this, this, and this, but her team is going to know that too. So that's where it gets really helpful. And then of course, if we know, well, we made about X on this program the last 2 times, and we usually increase by X, then we can start doing income projections based on that, right? Does that make sense? Like, because we already have the suite of programs, we already have the data, all of that kind of stuff, right? Lucy says, oh my gosh, I adore this way of approaching it. It takes off so much pressure, but still leaves so much more room for expanding into what's possible. Exactly the point. Thank you, Lucy. Different Lucy's. So I've got to hop off, but I'll come back later. Awesome. Thank you. Shari says, do your clients who lean feminine energy prefer flow and freedom still aligned to mapping launches for the year? I would say for the most part. I mean, I think that they realize it's more for team and more for creating flow and freedom because they have that planned out. So I think so. Yeah. Like, I mean, I would say like, they definitely don't want it to feel really rigid, but I do think it feels like more flow when they can go to their team and be like, hey, like, let's get this set up. Tanya says, planning for my team is the hardest part for me. I'm used to doing it a little bit last minute myself. Yeah. And listen, I think that's just part of growth, right? I think that that's where the scale kind of tips in your business, where it's almost not about doing it last minute, which is sometimes what got us to where we were. I have definitely had to make that shift in my own business of being someone that could really trust herself to throw shit together last minute, to being someone that had to work really, really hard to not do that for a team. So if you're in that transition period, I think it just totally makes sense and is part of the growth trajectory for sure. Yeah. And like Elisa says, my maternity leave is also on the horizon next year. So for us, like having a really strong plan of what's happening next year is helpful, not just because obviously for income purposes, like for me, when I'm on maternity leave, I'm like taking off. So I'm still paying my team, but I'm not like taking payment. So, we've had to plan really strategically around that as well. But it's just being able to do that and to know that because we have the data to go into it, right? Yeah, good. I'm so glad it's going to feel less overwhelming. Yeah, if my CEO knew things in my plan, 100%. It's so important. Marie says, yes, last minute productivity boost that has always worked, but keeps me stuck now and puts too much pressure on my system. Exactly. Sometimes we can get that last minute stuff done, but when we have a whole team around us, it's hard to do that. So the point is, it really depends on where you're at in your business. And the reason I wanted to talk about this, and I have some other stuff I want to talk about too, but is because I think at this time of year, it's so easy to get caught up in that stuff. And it's so easy to get caught up in this idea of like, okay, I have to have a plan and it has to look like this and whatever. And it really just depends on where you're at. And like, plans can be really, really helpful at a certain point in your business, and they can be really, really, really limiting at another point in your business, or they can become expectations versus possibilities that can make you feel really disappointed in like January or February of the year. And we don't want that. It's so unnecessary, and it's so not how business works. Like the first like couple of years in my business, like I was just getting to the point of being able to do that. And so do not make it wrong if you're like, well, I can't really project my income. That's totally fine. Go back to that idea of how do I build out 5 ways I could hit my goal, and hold on to all of those as possibilities and potential, knowing that there are a lot of ways to get there without feeling rigid in any one way, right? The other thing I want to talk about that a lot of income planning does not take into account is income fluctuations. So we're going to go into that a little bit too. Shari says, I want to know how you're planning for maternity leave and mamahood and a one-on-one business model, but that's a whole other life. Yeah, Megan and I will probably do that. I think I definitely want to talk about that because I think I'm probably doing it pretty different compared to most, but I will definitely talk about that, Shari. Okay, so I drew you guys a thing. If you've been to many of my lives, you've probably seen me draw this before, but this is what a lot of income looks like. You start of the year, end of the year, and it looks like this along the way, right? And so when we're doing income projections, we are very rarely taking this shit into account. And so again, then what's happening is we're creating a ton of expectation that our income should be going up every single month or should be exactly steady. Like this is how so many people project income, where it goes up every single month, or they have to make, if they want to make, X amount, they divide that out over 12 and they decide it has to look like this much every month. Neither of those makes any sense. Okay. It's so important to say that. Yes, looking at all the different ways. The pink legal pad is my best friend. I have so many of these. Yeah, Patricia said so true. So why this is important is because this is more what it will probably look like than this or this, right? And so when you can see like, oh, this is normal, that's so helpful because you get less and less attached to like, well, I was supposed to make, 30K by February and I haven't. And so my year is fucked, and knowing that just because you started here in January, got here in February, and we're here in March, it also doesn't mean your year is fucked, right? So most of what happens in business, especially when we're in the like first few years, I mean, fuck, even past that, but is that the momentum is compounding and growing every year. And so ideally we're wanting to follow like, what is the trajectory? Not like the trend is like, are we trending upward for the year? That's what matters. And that's how it's usually going to look, right? This is obviously just an example. I'm not saying it has to be up, down, up, down, up, down. I was just trying to count to 12 as I did it. It might be like up, way down, up, like whatever. It's not like I'm saying it always has to be this either. But it's so important to see this because if your predictions look like it being up every month and then your actual looks like this, it's easy to really make your business wrong when it's not, right? My clients' P&L picks up, but they still grow. Yeah, totally. Shari says, oh my God, in true high achiever fashion, I tried to predict fluctuations and drove myself crazy with arbitrariness in my first year. Right. Because especially in your first year, you don't even know, like maybe a few years in, you know, like, oh, we usually have a dip in July and we usually have a dip in September or something like that. And then you can kind of play with those predictions a little bit more. Or, you know, I usually take, this might be some of my clients, like I usually take July off and spend time with my kiddos. So like, I know that there's probably gonna be fluctuation there. Like you can start planning some of that in, but it will just depend, and it requires data. Like Shari is saying, she drove herself crazy because it was her first year, so she had no data to go off of, right? I was just counting to 12. I really was, because I drew another one that had like, I don't know, 17, and I was like, well, this doesn't really make sense for my illustration. Elisa says, I'm working towards 10K months. I'm not attached to the timeline. So that means I would kind of brainstorm all the ways I can get there and then just pick one of those to get started and go from there. Yeah. And I mean, even when you say pick one to get started, like, I think like play with the income and then pick a strategy. Like, so you might say like, well, I could hit it by getting 10 people here and 5 people here and whatever, but you don't even have to pick one of those. Like your strategy is not based on, I have to get 10 people in this program. Your strategy is then going to be based on like, what events am I doing when, what marketing am I doing when, that kind of stuff. And so like, it's helpful to see these as different things in a sense, right? So like, what is the big goals might be like, play with all the ways that can happen. And then your plan is really like the process goals. Like maybe your process goal to get to 10K months is like, do a challenge every other month or something. Like that's what I would plan. Does that make sense, Elisa? Lucy said, so reassuring. Nobody tells us this shit, so we assume we're getting it all wrong. Thank you. No problem. Yeah, I totally agree. Nobody says like, oh, my income took a dip this month, right? Like, no. But what I also want to talk about when we look at this, that's really important to say, is that especially if you're a little bit further along in business, I know when you're newer, it's like harder to think in this way, but this is why I tell my clients, like, you need to be thinking based on quarters and years and not months. Like this arbitrary thing we do in the online space where we track months and make the month so important. And what I made this month, oh my God, means everything. If you're making 6, multi-6, 7 figures, like what you made this month means nothing in a sense, right? What I'm looking for with my clients is this line happening, right? Just because you start here and then got here, you know, whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months later, or 4 months later, that's fine. 4, yeah. Sorry. That's fine. It doesn't mean anything. It just means this is what happened this quarter, but you had some big peaks compared to here. So like you probably had a really good quarter, even if you're ending the quarter with a shitty month or whatever, right? And same here. So this is how shit grows, you guys. Like if you start here one year and end here the next, and then this line continues up from here, your trajectory is going up, even if you're having down months, right? Okay, I just want to not miss your comments. Yeah, Elisa says planning the challenges or launches without putting pressure on the number of new clients. Exactly. That's very helpful to differentiate the strategy versus the options to get there. We can come back to that, Rebecca, totally. I think the month is more about feeling than the money. More about feeling than the money. Yeah, totally. I think that, you know, sometimes it can be really juicy and fun to feel into like, oh, I just made X this month. And I think that that can be great. Like I personally do track my months. I'm not saying don't look at them, but I'm just saying like, don't make them mean so much. Like I think some people kind of like live and die by those monthly numbers and are trying to take every month as like a projection of like everything. And that's what I want to get away from. But by all means, still have fun with them. I totally agree with that. Like I still, again, track them, love them, have fun with them, but it cannot be this like end all be all thing in your business, especially when we're teaching ourselves and telling ourselves that I have to make more every single month. Like, y'all, most businesses, big or small, do not just make more every single month ongoingly, no matter what. That is not it. It really is not. That is not how it works, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's just really important to say. But what I think this can help you see is how, like, you know, within the same quarter, I can have a really down month and I can have like my biggest month ever. And that's the kind of stuff that levels out to create like these, you know, big wins over time. So like, let's say this was 10K months and this was 40K months or something in a year. Like, that's a huge jump, but you might have had like a 15K month here. That's okay. Like, as long as it's getting you up here. And then again, then next year, this is where this starts. So then of course you're making more. That's what is really going to grow shit over time. It really is going to be the difference maker. Elisa stopped doing the dishes for us so she could concentrate. Perfect. Shari said, and if you're pivoting or launching something new, income might go down as you plan to expand. Things nobody talks about. 100%. I always say, like, usually before there's a big expansion, there's a contraction. Like, that's even how I drew this to an extent, right? Is like big contraction, big expansion, big contraction, big expansion, because I see this all the time in clients. Marie says it's true that we never hear anyone say my income took a dip this month. People always celebrate their income increasing and yay for bragging, but I unconsciously assumed with the comparison syndrome that they kept on growing and I felt shitty about my biz. Totally. And listen, I think it's a both and there. Like, yeah, nobody has to say like, oh man, this month sucked. I reverted back to like what I made at the beginning of the month. Or like, usually people will share that way in hindsight, like, you know, it makes sense. But I think it's just having that perspective that just because we're not hearing it, that's marketing. It doesn't mean it's not happening, right? Hannah says, whoa, I just checked my quarters from this year. Despite having a couple big months in Q2, my Q3 was actually double. Mind blown. I was totally live and die by the month scale. Amazing, Hannah. Yes, that's so important. So you can probably see like Q1, you did good. Q2, you had a couple big months. You did better. Q3, you maybe didn't even have the big fluctuations, but you did best. And so you see how like your trajectory is doing this, even if you told yourself, oh, Q2 was better because we had 2 big months, right? But I guarantee you this is how it's looking this year. And that is what you want to celebrate, right? So good. Yeah, Elisa says I had a dip because I was preparing for a launch and didn't put much energy into selling my one-on-one. 100%. And that is so natural. Like, this is how we blow up and expand. Sometimes we give ourselves a moment to contract. And so we kind of have to be willing to do that to see the bigger jumps. If I'm only available for my income to go up every month, I'm rarely going to do what I might have had to do this month to get to this month, or what I might have had to pull back on this month to get to this month, right? So that's really important to say too, is like, these aren't just like fluke bad months. Sometimes they're preparing you for what comes this month. They're getting you ready or getting you set up. Or maybe like this was the month that you were selling like crazy, but here's the month where the income comes in from it, you know? So I just really want y'all to keep this in mind and know that this is how your business will grow over time. And when we talk about like minimums and things like that, if you keep resetting your minimum every year and then it goes up, like, yeah, you're going to have a growing business, right? But again, it cannot look like every month being that. Or you start having to make decisions that limit you so that you never have a dip. And that's not the point, and it's not what's going to create big growth. Michelle said, I just snapped out my annual income and I'm going to need more dots on my chart to get a line that looks like that over time. Too funny. Yeah, Sherry says, that's why I love year-to-date numbers too. Sometimes can be such a nice macro perspective. Yes, 100%. Hi, my name is Lacey and I live inside people's heads without knowing them. This is such a good vibe. Aw, thank you. Oh, Mandy, YTD is like year to date. Yeah. So like, you know, maybe, for example, like here you could be like, well, yeah, I had a shitty month, but so far year to date, I've made X kind of thing, you know? So that can be helpful too. But anyway, keep this in mind. Really, really, really important. Um, here's the other thing I want to talk about related to this that feels so valuable here. Most years at A Lit Up Life, right? Everyone's showing you cool. Most years at A Lit Up Life, we added about 100K of revenue each year. Now, the last 2 years, it's been more, obviously, but again, we've just built up trajectory here, right? But the thing I want to say there is that I think that even though I think that that is a wildly big number, I think that in our industry, sometimes that can be almost like not enough, or like so many people don't just want to make at 100K. Like most people wouldn't set that as a goal. They're like, I want to double, I want to triple, I want to do like all this stuff, right? It's totally fine. You can want what you want and have the goals you want. But the point I want to make here is that I think that this type of growth has almost become unsexy, right? Because we're like, yeah, but like, how much could I add there? Like, I want it to like triple. Okay, well, like maybe it didn't quite triple. Maybe it did. You know what I mean? Obviously, it depends. But like, if you're just adding a certain amount each year and that's capitalizing, and you're not adding a ton of expenses, you are making a fuck ton of money. And so I want to talk about that a little bit too, because I think that this is another place where we can go really, really wrong in thinking about some of this mapping. And so what I mean by that is I think that sometimes in our industry, we want to grow so fast that we're willing to do or spend anything at that cost. Right. Oh, let me see what y'all are saying. Elisa says, oh my gosh, when I compare my income from the beginning of the year to now, it's a whole other universe. So good to acknowledge that. Exactly. It's freaking amazing. Right. So it's so important to see, like, we have to be looking at numbers like that. This month thing is just crazy. We were looking at your bookkeeper. I missed part of that. And I had to be called out a little. So good, Shari. Rebecca says, right. So many coaches talking about going from broke to millionaire in a year or two. And it's easy to think that's the only way to think you're successful. Exactly. Maggie says, I love unsexy goals. I always say the most boring emotions make me the most money. It's true. Like calm, focused, professional. I will now take that thinking into goals. Preach. Thank you so much, Maggie. Michelle says, yes, this is true for me too. My line is a little on the struggle bus, but my income has brought in 3 times the revenue as last year. My expenses also increased though, but those are leveling out. Yeah. So I think it's like really helpful to think about that, because like what I think can be tempting in our space is to go, well, I don't just want to grow by 100K. I want to, triple or whatever. And so then we'll spend so much in investments to try to do that. And so we'll spend 400K to make 500K. Well, y'all, you're only taking home 100K then. I mean, and obviously there's taxes and everything, so like not even. But what if you could have spent 50K to make 250K? Well, then you're taking home 200, right? So you actually grew your take home by 100K, as opposed to being able to say on the internet that you made 500K. Does that make sense? Like there is such a big difference there. And that is what has worked for me so well in A Lit Up Life, is that I have always been good about managing expenses. And this is true whether I had team, coaches, whatever. I've always just kept my eye on that. And so when we added 100K most years, a lot of that was pure profit, right? And that is the stuff that changes the game in terms of your experience of the money, right? And your experience of the business. If it's just about what number you can say on the internet, but because of that, you're only taking home, a quarter. And when I'm saying taking home, again, I'm not even factoring in taxes. You're only taking home a quarter of that. That's still not as sexy. Trust me, it's not. It's not fun to work for 500K and only get to take home 100 of that, right? Yeah, Shari says it's normal for investments to increase before an expansion too. Yep. Take home combo is such a big one I'm here for. Yeah. And like, listen, Michelle, it doesn't mean never invest, but I think it's just like when we invest so big year over year, thinking that that's what will jump us always, that's what I think gets dicey. Where like it can feel like that's always the thing. Like, well, if I want to make more, I just invest more and more and more. And we have to be playing that game of like, when does that start to level out and what makes sense there? Because that's not sustainable over years. What's sustainable is to like make the investment, have the income increase, level out, and so on and so forth, right? Obviously, I spend way more now on my team than I did, say 3 years ago. But in terms of percent, the percent of my revenue has gone up much, much more than the percent of my expenses. And so that's when your take home starts getting greater and greater. And that's really important to look at. Nicolette says, thank you for bringing up that distinction. People don't talk about the difference in what they're investing versus what they are earning, for sure. Yeah, like you don't have to keep investing to increase. At some point you find your sweet spot of investments and then your income gets to increase forever. Yeah, totally. And again, it might go up a little bit at a time, but the percentages aren't so exponential that you're never seeing that return. Yeah. And exactly. Patricia says, I think that happens a lot because people focus on revenue instead of profit. Yeah. And I think the truth is that people get more excited about what they can say versus what it feels like to have it. So I personally would much rather say like, I made 250K this year and have 200K than to say I made 500K this year and to have 100, So I think it's just really remembering and looking at that too. Like, make sure that when you're income planning, you're factoring in and thinking about expenses as well, not thinking about like, okay, I set this big goal, I have this big income plan, and now I'm willing to invest whatever it takes to get me there. Like, no, I'm all about like stretching, big investments, all of that. Like, I'm so into that and believe in that. And I think there's this way where it's like, again, I set this like big arbitrary goal, which we talked about earlier. And now I'm willing to like invest so exponentially to get there that both are kind of just like throwing spaghetti at a wall as opposed to it feeling really intentional. Obviously, one of the reasons I'm a fan of the partnership model is because of that. My clients are only investing more when they're making more. And that feels obviously really good to me because it's like directly correlated to the money that they're making, right? So when this is happening in their business, their partnership income or partnership payment is going to be reflective of this too. Again, not everyone, has to have that model, but I'm just saying like, that's one of the reasons I like it is because as my clients grow, like we're still able to continue to manage expenses really, really well through that. Yeah, you don't have to go in massive debt to be successful. Totally. And it's also okay to go in debt. It's just, are you being intentional and is there a plan, right? Like I certainly went into some debt to start my business. I don't regret that at all, but it also isn't a long-term game plan, right? Are you doing Christmas giveaways? I thought like your favorite things. Yeah, I think I'm going to, at least I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it yet. I might just do gift cards because I feel like most people last year actually chose the cash value over the gift, but I have to think about that more. Shari says my favorite combo with clients is when they cross a big money milestone and I'm like, okay, time for us to figure out how much we're going to put you on payroll for. Unsexy logistics I love. Yeah, totally. Hi, Belinda. No, you're not late. You're fine. Right on time. But I think that's really important, right? So, the reason I feel so proud of the fact that most years we've added 100K is because most years we've taken home the majority of that, right? So I just really want to enforce that for you and have you think about that is like, please do not get so caught up in what it is that it looks like or what it is that you can share online or say to people that you lose sight of what is this actually helping me take home? What is this actually translating to in my life? Because what I can tell you for sure and what I see in myself and my clients is the more that what you're doing in your business gives back to you and creates that even energy exchange, the more sustainable it is over time. If you put in 500K of work to make 100K, it doesn't matter how good it feels to share it on the internet. Over time, that exchange will start to feel shitty, I promise you. Right? So this is just a reminder that like that's where you have to keep your attention. I think sometimes again with like income or sales planning, it's like so based on like just, you know, an arbitrary number that you want, which is totally cool. Again, do that. But we can get so locked in on that that we will do or spend anything that we think it takes to get there. And I totally, again, believe in investing, but I really think that this is something we have to watch very, very carefully because it is so easy to get in that trap of overspending year over year over year. And even if your income is growing, it really doesn't matter if you're overspending that much. Like, you know, there are people in our industry who are making 7 figures and are taking home 100K of it. And like, yes, it sounds good to have 7 figures, but to be running a company that is making 7 figures and only taking home 100K of that will start to feel bad over time. And that's when people want to burn down their businesses. It's just literally not sustainable, right? So again, back to what we were saying, like make the plan, right? Make the plan of like, what is the actual process and marketing strategy? And definitely think about like, what are the, you know, exciting ways it could get there, but be really careful not to confound it where it feels like this has to be the number no matter what. And now it's an expectation I have to run at it. Shari says, so if you receive a desire for more income, but you don't know how offer yet, how do you think about that in terms of planning? I mean, I would either say, if that was a client, I would say like, either we know that there are endless possibilities and like, do you have programs that it can already come through? Or if they don't have programs that can already come through, then we need to start thinking about what that looks like. So I think, again, like there's a way to be like really excited about a figure. And then there is a way to be like, does that integrate with my business? Does that make sense? So, and I think both are important because I think if not, sometimes we can get really excited about a number and have literally not built a business that has a way to bring that number in and then constantly feel frustrated. So I think it takes a little bit of both, like by all means, do the mindset work and like make sure there's at least a path to get there. Again, it doesn't mean it'll look like that path. It doesn't mean it has to be that path, but like, is there one, you know? For example, you didn't always desire the million. When did you receive that desire? Did you know in advance it would come through revenue share? Yeah. I mean, what I knew at that point, Shari, is that I wasn't, and this is important too, is like, I knew I wasn't going to change my business model to hit the million, right? But I knew that the potential for it to come through revenue share already existed. So I wasn't willing to be like, I want the million enough to like, go change my business model. I didn't. I love my business model and I wanted that more than I ever wanted the million. But I also knew that revenue share had the potential to bring that in. And so like, I think both of those together were important. Like, it wasn't like, well, I just have no way to get there. But I also wasn't like, and now I'll change everything if I have to get there. Does that make sense? So I think it's kind of like holding on to both, but also like really knowing like, is there even one path to that in the business? And so again, that's sort of my takeaway, where it's like, that's why you draw out a lot of the possibilities and just keep showing yourself the possibilities as opposed to getting so rigid. Like, again, if I had been like, okay, well, like I need to make this much and then revenue share has to do this much and then clients would need to be, you know, making approximately this much and like that, I don't try to get all into that, but like, I just knew there was a path there. Like, obviously in a sense, revenue share has unlimited potential. I guess that's not totally true because we cap ours at 20K per month, but like effectively, right? Like that's still exponential. So yeah, like that's just it, is like, I think, you know, do I see the path, but also not getting so locked into it that like I'm willing to do a bunch of shit that I hate. So I think that that's really important too. So I have to go because I have a call at 2. But I hope that was really helpful to you guys. Happy to expand on this more if you have more questions on it. But remember this, remember to keep thinking about this, coming back to this. Remember to be discerning when you're hearing all this stuff about planning at this time of year. Figure out what fits you and your business and your model best, right? Because they're all different. And remember to do things that feel expansive and take the pressure down, because ultimately that's what's going to help you create more success next year. It's not going to be following one plan to a T. So I hope that helps. If you commented, you'll be eligible to win that $100 gift card, and I will announce that tomorrow. And thank you guys so much for spending your time here. I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a beautiful week. Bye, guys.